Seneca is a very interesting Stoic, and he's one of the three main Stoics that we have a substantial amount of work to judge them from. The other two are Epictetus, that we have dealt with in Symposium 20, I think, and when we talked about his Stoic manual, and also Marcus Aurelius and his meditations, which, if this goes well, perhaps we could visit in a relatively short time. So I think Seneca is a very interesting figure, because a long time ago, when I first read him, I wasn't particularly impressed. But now that I focused a bit more and read him, a bit more deeply, I was a bit impressed. And I want to say that he is very modern in a sense. And what do I mean by that? He is very much interested in things people are nowadays interested in, such as self-development, self-growth, how to think about life. And in that respect, I think he has a lot to say to us.
I'm quite a big fan of Seneca. I like Socrates and I like Seneca.
Yeah.
They're probably my two favourite ancient philosophers. A lot of people like them.
Yeah.
And Seneca, a lot of his stuff are his letters that he wrote while he was exiled on Corsica. That's a lot of the stuff that survives of Seneca, isn't it? And like all Stoics, like all Stoicism, it is sort of a philosophy. It's sort of a practical philosophy. It's actually supposed to, and does, hopefully, sort of help you in your real life.
Yeah.
It's not all that abstract quite often.
Yes.
So it can actually help.
What is really distinctive about his writings is that he was much more of an essayist as opposed to a treatise writer. So for instance, he's not writing a metaphysical treatise like Aristotle does. And he is much less interested in metaphysics than Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius are. He isn't very interested into metaphysics. Obviously, he does subscribe to a Stoic metaphysics, and I think letter 65 is where he is mostly developing some metaphysical ideas, but he's primarily interested in ethics. He is overwhelmingly so. And he sort of engages in a criticism of Aristotle and Plato and their metaphysical propensity, and he thinks that metaphysics is way simpler than they portray to be. But let me just say one thing, that we know of Seneca's writings from his letters to Lucilius, which he wrote during the end of his life, I think the last year of his life, in 64 to 65 AD. And we also have some tragedies from him and some small essays. And he also has a very interesting title called Depumpkinfication, something like that, Apokolokythokintosis. It's one of the weird titles in philosophy. But his letters are supposed to be one of the most philosophical specimen of his work. And they are really brilliant. And they're really easy to read, but that is one interesting that is a bit elusive, because he may start talking about something that seems completely irrelevant in the beginning, like the house of someone. And then he's going to throw in a gem of thought after 3 or 4 pages, where you're guaranteed to think that what you thought of as boring Seneca pages suddenly are completely different. And that is an interesting thing, that his speech is very direct. You don't get the sense that he's speaking to a classroom, like, for instance, Aristotle gives the impression of. He gives the impression that he's speaking directly to you. He does mention Lucilius sometimes, where he says, my dear Lucilius, and things like that. But at the end of the day, it's like someone actually talking to you. You don't lose anything by just ditching the name of Lucilius and just think he is actually talking to you.
It is quite accessible in that way. Yeah, absolutely. Even Aristotle can be a bit difficult. Like the metaphysics of Aristotle, you have to very, very carefully read it. Or I do.
Yeah.
You have to quite carefully read it and make sure you're following along with what he's saying. You can't just scan it.
Yes.
You have to pay attention, work fairly hard, really. And Aristotle isn't particularly known as one of the more difficult philosophers. But Seneca is good for that. The letters of Seneca are good for that. You can just sort of dive in and you sort of you get what what it says on the tin is what you get. So
fun thing that you mention it, because Aristotle is very dry. His treatises are very dry. Some of them can be really tough reads. But we are also told by Cicero that he had some plays and some dialogues that were just beautifully written. We have none of them survives if they existed. I don't think he. I sort of think that if Cicero said it, most probably it would be correct. But it's a pity that we don't have it. But at least it's good that we think that Aristotle had a more lively side to him, because some of his writings are a bit dry. But Seneca's writings aren't like that, and you don't get a 400 pages treatise in metaphysics and talking about substance and essence.
Some philosophy is almost impenetrable, right? I mean, I don't know, somebody like Hegel or Wittgenstein or something. It's very, very difficult. It is difficult with the best will in the world. I think a lot of people read that sort of thing and convince themselves they know exactly what's being said, but it's very difficult. So Seneca's not like that, right?
Yeah.
The letters of Seneca, you can just dive in and read, and he's not trying to obfuscate very much.
He's not a philosopher's philosopher. So he's not someone who is talking primarily about the abstract aspects of the discipline. He's talking about the aspects of the discipline that are directly relevant to ethics and how to live a good life and how to live a happy life. Because self-contentment is one of the most central aspects of virtue for him. He thinks that the Stoic sage feels self-content. Is self-content. They don't have worries or fears or things like that. So he is not like Hegel, someone who's writing about the history of philosophy. And in order to understand him, you need to have a good grasp of the history of philosophy and of history as well. That most people who read Hegel don't. He's someone who's really plain. He's talking to a friend of his, Lucilius, who's literally asking him advice for how to live a better life. So, and also he's talking. You can also see him as a motivational speaker in some cases. It's a bit cheesy, but I think that there's no problem with this.
No, I like it. I like it.
Yeah.
I like plain speaking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the carpe diem sort of thing, seize the day and stuff like that. I don't have any problem with it. A lot of people shun it. I think what is something we should look down upon is the way that these slogans that do contain words of wisdom are used in marketing, for instance, and people who don't know and haven't done the math. And they, for instance, they're saying, okay, seize the day, and then they show you a soft drink or something. This is something that obviously communicates that I don't know what I'm talking about. But when I get the impression that someone like Seneca does it and someone who knows what they're talking about do it, I don't mind. I think actually it's pretty constructive.
So I definitely think that's deliberately the case.
Yes.
Seneca, I would have thought, I think it's true to say, is deliberately trying to speak plainly.
Yes.
And to reduce things sometimes to what we might in the modern day call a soundbite or something. I think that's very deliberate.
Yeah.
Well,
good thing he wasn't Spartan, so we have thankfully more than a soundbite. But that's good, because he's a really beautiful writer, and he has very rich things to say. So what we should remember when we read him is that he is a Stoic, and he developed Stoicism, but he isn't someone who is afraid of saying every now and then that Epicurus has a good idea. And Stoics and Epicureans, they were the two main Hellenistic schools of philosophy that were in rivalry. But he isn't afraid to say that Epicurus has a good idea here or there.
Yeah.
So he is interested. He does have an open mind, and he reads other people, and he tries to see if he can accommodate good insights of theirs into his philosophy. He doesn't seem to be a very dogmatic thinker. And also he had a very interesting life, because sometimes people accuse Stoics of being a bit detached from the world of current affairs, as opposed to just being psychologically detached. That is something that is praised by Stoics. He had a very turbulent life also. Let me just say one thing, and I know that you have way more things to add, especially when it comes to his relationship with the Emperor Nero. So his name was Lucius Annaeus Seneca. He was born in Cordoba in Spain around 4 BC. And died around 65 AD. And he was basically ordered to commit suicide because he was linked with the Pisonian conspiracy against
Spoiler alert.
Nero. Yeah, spoiler alert.
2,000-year-old spoiler alert.
And spoiler alert, Seneca is dead. So he was also sentenced to death by successive emperors. I think both Caligula and Claudius sentenced him to commit suicide, but they suspended it. And he spent 8 years in exile in Corsica between 41 and 49 AD because he was accused of having a relationship with Caligula's sister. In 49 AD, he became a praetor and became a tutor to Nero. And he was acting as an unofficial chief minister for about around 8 years. And I've heard, from what I've seen, you obviously know much more about it than I do, some people have said that the first years of Nero were years of sound imperial government, and a lot of people think that this was Seneca's doing.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.